Hello, Yakri here with another Dominions 5 video. This time I'm going to be going through blood magic from level 0 to level 3 of research. Now this is, if you're feeling like you got deja vu, a re-recording of my first blood magic video because the text was kind of illegible, so I've increased the resolution, tweaked some of the other settings, and it should be much easier to read now. And so it might be a little bit different because I'm going again from scratch and I don't use a script for these, but should be pretty much the same content, so if you already listened to that one, you can probably skip right over it. But it wasn't really at an acceptable level of quality to leave in. So, Bleed. This spell is terrible. It's a 0th level spell, so, you know, what can you expect? Don't ever use it. I mean, it costs a slave to do an effect. It's not that good. It deals a little bit of damage. Sabbath Slave and Sabbath Master. Now, I've already talked about Communion Slaves in the past, both in some specific videos about them, and both in the Thaumaturgy video series. So we don't need to go over those again, but this is the Blood Communion Slave and Communion Master spells. They do allow you to mix communions, right? So you can cast Sabbath Master, and you can have a bunch of Astral Mages cast Communion Slave, and the Sabbath Master will be able to use them as slaves for casting blood spells or doing whatever the hell they want, right? So they're totally interchangeable. It works as the same spell, just in blood. Reinvigoration. So this is kind of interesting. It causes the mage to remove all of his own fatigue. It's a caster effect spell, so it'll remove the fatigue from you as well as from any of your communion slaves. It's very useful to slip in if you want to cast a few really heavy fatigue spells in a single set of scripting, right? Also, it can be good to cast at the end of your script. If you're casting a bunch of fatigue heavy spells in a communion, you can cast this from a communion master at the end to clear his fatigue, clear his slave's fatigue, and leave the AI to be able to auto cast whatever spells it wants with a empty fatigue pool after your scripting is done. Blood heal, as with most heal effects, this is pretty garbage. It does heal the caster, so perhaps since you're healing the caster, it's actually a little bit more useful than a lot of other heal spells in Dominions. So perhaps you could do something like plan to cast, I don't know, Earthquake, and then heal yourself, which would heal your communion slaves as well. So if you're planning to cast a battlefield-wide magic that is going to damage but not kill you, in your expectation, you could cast this after to restore some of your life, and then go again, right? So, Imps. Summon Imps is not terrible, not great, so this is actually an okay combat summon for level 1 magic, right? Imps, as you can see here by their stat block, are not really great, but they have okay defense skill and okay attack skill, and they do a little bit of damage with their claws, which are just going to do, 9 damage per hit slashing. Not terrible. You do summon 5, which is kind of nice that you've got a bunch of bodies. This is I think it's the best combat summon at such a low level of magic research. But it does cost a Blood Slave, which is essentially a gem, and it's a gem type that you probably don't get passively, not for most nations. So could be a little bit of a pain in the ass to actually cast on top of taking 100 fatigue. So, Blood Burst. Okay, Blood Burst is not totally awful except for its fatigue cost and gem cost, right, of 2. 11 armor negating damage in a area of effect 1 actually wouldn't be terrible if it was free to cast and cost 20 fatigue. Of course, it's only a level 1 spell, so it is supposed to be kind of bad. Ritual to summon a Shadow Imp. This is a scout. It's a pretty good scout, actually, with Stealthy 60, Dark Power 2, probably not going to get any use out of that, but it's Stealthy 60, you know, that's not too much you can complain about there. Actually got a decent amount of movement as well, and it's only 4 gems. This is probably it might actually be a better option than recruiting indie scouts, honestly. If you have a nice cheap Blood 1 mage that you could use to cast it, who that you have plenty of, if you're playing Mictlan or something, because you don't want to be using a big powerful mage to waste a turn on that, because the research value you can get out of a big powerful mage is probably not worth losing, right? So bind fiery imps. So this is kind of like summon imps, but since it's out of combat, you do get a slightly better thing out of it, right? With fire shield 6 versus crappy troops, these guys are going to be okay, right? They'll be a little bit effective versus fairly crappy troops. They have an actual weapon, so they deal a little bit better damage. but not crazy good, right? It's still low-level stuff. Not something I would bank on, but I could conceivably see someone using it in the early game. Blood Boils. This is a fairly decent combat spell for blood magic if you also have access to fire on the same mage. It only hits one person, but it does 11 armor negating damage. Not terrible. It's kind of like a crappier Mind Burn. That's how I like to think of it, because it is magic resistance negates as well. Bowl of Blood. So this is a blood site search. There aren't a lot of blood sites. I don't consider this particularly useful, but on the other hand, because blood slaves are so plentiful, site searching for 5 gems with blood magic is fairly cheap. I might consider doing it if you really want to make sure you don't have any useful sites around, but searching with just a blood 2 or 3 mage is gonna get you most of the value you want anyway, right? And yeah, it's like a lot of the site searching spells, not super worth it. Banished Demon, it's great if you're targeting a demon. Of course, for the cost, it's not super worth it. The only way I could conceivably imagine using this is if I was spamming it with like a mage who was at least blood 2, so they could cast it repeatedly, and I was trying to take out like a demon lord, right? So if someone later on binds like a frost demon lord or something, and you want to try and snipe it, and they don't have a lot of other demons in their force, or it's raiding you or something, you could try and take it out with this, right? That's one option you got there. All right, Bind Bone Fiends. I think this is one of the first really decent summons you get, which frankly is very early on. Blood 1, Death 1, only Research 2, only costs 3 blood slaves for 5 of these Bone Fiends. Very early, cheap, and or easy to cast and cost effective, right? Considering that these guys have 15 strength with their claws, which means it's 15 slashing damage, that's quite good. You have 2 attacks of that. 13 defense, alright, so they can evade attacks some of the time. And 0 protection, meaning they're going to die in probably 2 hits, which probably means like average of 3 to 4 attacks before they die, with 15 hit points, versus a lot of like mediocre troops. Versus good troops, they'll die faster. But still, 5+, so if you have a mage who's like blood 3, death 1, you can get pretty good value out of this in the early game. Yeah, I would definitely consider summoning these guys, right? If I was rushing blood magic, right? So if you're in a situation where you're rushing blood magic and you need to fight in the early game, you're not going to get a lot of value out of blood magic early on, right? So you might seriously want to consider doing this just because there's no other way you're going to get some extra combat value to bulk up your army in the early game if you're going down this route. And there are some nations where it is worth it to rush blood magic. I would certainly consider it in Mictlan. For Mictlan, there are some other goals you want as well, but it can be a pretty good idea, and I don't think they would actually get access to this, right? I'm trying to remember their mage pool, but in any case, there's probably some cases where you could conceivably do this. Well, I can't think offhand of like who has this like blood death type mage right in the early game. Alright, so Bind Spine Devils is another ritual. These guys are kind of bad, I think. Yeah, I mean, they have 25 hit points. They have okay protection. The whole poison thing is kind of shit. Poison Barbs is not very good. Venomous Claws, whatever. They're going to kill things with their claws pretty easily. I would probably prefer to bind Bone Fiends, but this is only blood magic. So, similar situation, but as with the Bone Fiends, but perhaps you only have access to blood magic, so you bind some of these guys. They're going to survive a lot more hits at protection 13 and HP 25, but I would rather have more bodies on the field and spread out the damage. Especially because bind Bone Fiends, let's see, Spine Devils, Venomous Claws, so that's just 15 damage. Bone Fiends also deal 15 damage, I think. Yeah. They both deal the same amount of damage, which means in my books, Bone Fiends are a lot better for how cheap they are, right? 3 blood slaves for 5 or 3 blood slaves for 1. So Spine Devil is 5 times more expensive. Definitely not worth it compared to bind Bone Fiends, but it is possibly easier to cast. Fiend of Darkness. So Fiend of Darkness is 5 for 1, which may sound even worse, right? Except here's the thing about Fiend of Darkness. He has flying. Okay, having flying is a huge deal in terms of the value of a unit. So a 30 HP unit with 10 protection, this means this guy's about as survivable as the Spine Devil, and he costs 2 blood slaves more. But because he has flying and still has those 2 attacks, he's super worth it, especially for how early you can get this. guy, right? If you can spend like if you can have 2 or 3 mages spend like 5 rounds binding these guys, you have like 10 to 15 of them, and you have like 10 to 15 of these troops that are essentially like cavalry jumping on someone's back line, that is great in the mid to early game. And I mean, 15 of them is going to be see if I can not totally fuck my math, 75 blood slaves. That's a lot, but you could feasibly get it at this point in the game. It's not one of my favorite options. You want to get a little bit higher into blood magic before you start to get to some of the more cost-effective stuff. But, you know, it's certainly not a terrible option, relatively speaking, if you need to do some summoning at blood 2, right? And maybe you have to go for some other research, or it's going to take you a bit to get the blood 3. Shouldn't take that long though, so I don't know if it's like such a transitory period that just because you'll get past blood 2 so fast, it may not be worth it for that reason. Agony is pretty good. It's a wide AoE fear spell that deals a slight amount of damage. So yeah, I would say just pretty good in general. Area of effect 4+, light damage, and cause fear. Pretty decent, especially versus like crappy morale troops like militia and stuff. Versus elite troops, it's probably not going to have a very good effect, but, you know, them's the breaks, right? Hell Power, this is actually kind of interesting, especially because you can have blood mages as communion masters. This is like Power of the Spheres, in that it increases all of your magic schools that you already have a point in by 1, except this increases it by 2. And it horror marks you, and it costs 300 fatigue and 3 blood slaves, so you really need like at least 2 or 4 blood, or to be at 3 blood in leading a communion. So if you're leading a communion, you would cast like Hell Power, and you cast Reinvigoration, and now you have like, you've gone from like, maybe you were at blood 3 with the communion, now you're at blood 5 with the communion, and that's quite a lot better. And maybe you have some other paths in there boosted up quite a lot. So, you know, from a 2 mage communion, if you cast this, suddenly you're 3 points ahead in terms of magic pathing. Quite good indeed. Okay, Leeching Touch. We're on to level 3 now. This is terrible just because, like, you can't pull it off. This is perhaps something that might happen if you had one of those new, like, combat caster characters, and they just coincidentally did this in combat from the AI. Yeah, that's how this might happen. It's a good spell if you can pull it off. Armor negating 15 damage, and it's life drain, meaning it heals you and restores your fatigue, so extremely good. Crossbreeding. Okay, so this is kind of hard to show you what are they called? They're called fuck, I can't actually remember what they're called. Okay, so I'm not gonna be able to bring these up because I forget what they're called. Foul Spawn. Wait, no, I do know what they're called. Foul Spawn. Okay, so I don't know if this is gonna show all of them because it's kind of weird like that. But so you usually get things like this. This is a bad result. Oh, this counts as a transformation bad result. I think all of them do, actually. Okay, so here's some examples of what you can get from crossbreeding. So crossbreeding is mostly pretty terrible because this Foul Beast and the Foul Spawn here, right? These guys are pretty great, but you barely ever get them. Like, look at how good the Foul Beast is. It's 42 hit points and decent stat line, with 1, 2, 3, 4 attacks and fear. So 4 attacks and fear, that's crazy good if you buff this thing. And you get 20 things from crossbreeding, right? But the thing is that, like, you know, probably all 20 of them will be like this little dude who has like crappy hit points, no protection, crappy stat line, 1 attack. Really garbo. However, quite a few of them have like this. This is some other common bad result that has 13 strength though, right? So because of that, and because even the crappiest ones have 11 strength, these guys are quite good for sieging, right? I mean, you get 20 of them, 20 plus of them, right? So if you have a very high blood mage, like blood 5 nature 1, you can get some pretty good results from crossbreeding, right? Or like quite a lot of crap at least, for 15 blood slaves. So if you want to take down someone's castle walls, this can be kind of a niche thing. Otherwise, it's pretty bad, but you can do funny, like, goofy meme strat type things where you get like a pretender, like the Freak Lord or whatever, was like the crossbreeding bonus. There's like a crossbreeding bonus book you can pick up as well, and then you can, you know, like set up him up to have like 9 blood magic or like 8 blood magic, and then you like put up some items on it to get up to 10, and then you do later on there's improved crossbreeding, which gets you 40 triple plus, meaning that it increases by 3 increments per blood level past the first, meaning that 10 blood you get a humongous number of these guys. And you just spam it up, and then you hit cast Gift of Reason on like the really good results, like there's like an ogre or something you can get. Well, not an ogre, but there's some really good results you can get out of it, that are like all have a ton of hit points, and you can kind of turn them into shitty thugs, and it's a whole thing. But it's not very good, is kind of the point I'm trying to get at here. But it's very entertaining. And like I said, though, you can get value out of it for sieging down castles. Okay, so Blood Feast, is this the one that restores your... I think this is the one that restores your... Oh crap. Blood of Victims rejuvenates the caster. Yes, it restores your afflictions. You remove afflictions with Blood Feast. I think it's like a 50% chance per affliction to just strip it off you. I think that's how it works. And you can develop a Blood Hunger. Really, this is fantastic. A fantastic spell if you have a thug unit that has access to blood magic, right? Or if it's a good enough unit, you can empower it in blood magic. For example, you can empower your Pretender up to blood 2, then cast Blood Feast a couple of times to strip off diseased, right? If your Pretender is dying of disease, as long as you catch it early and you have access to all the blood slaves you need, it's only 3 turns before you can get the disease off you, and it takes 10 turns to kill you. So that's one of the ways to like slip out of that problem. So it's a very useful spell in general for Blood Nations. But, you know, niche, of course. Alright, so Pain Transfer. Transferring wounds from your mage to your blood slaves. This is kind of terrible because you need your blood slaves to cast spells for the most part. I'm trying to think if most of the reasons you would want to cast this, if you wanted to cast this, all your blood slaves would be dead because like someone's casting Earthquake and it just kills all your blood slaves, right? Because it deals AoE damage. I'm trying to think of like a... I don't think I've heard of anyone like suggesting to me even that there's a way to use this effectively. I don't know, but yeah, there's always a first time, right? There's always a first time. Maybe, I wonder if it says in the vicinity. I wonder if it means in the battlefield, because then maybe you could do something kind of dumb, like give a commander 30 blood slaves, cast this spell, and have the commander be a thug with flying, and then jump to the back line. I don't know if it's still probably not worth 30 blood slaves, but you know, you could do it, right? Okay, so here we get to some of the spicy stuff. Devils. So 7 blood slaves, 2 blood, 2 fire. Bit more of a stringent requirement on being able to cast this. Fairly decent cost, but these guys are fantastic, and here's why. So, first off, 8 protection is not great, but it's enough that their 35 hit points isn't just like just a load of crap, right? Because if they had 0 protection, that just it decreases the number of hits they can survive before dying by an enormous amount, because protection is damage reduction. So it's like the difference between taking 10 damage per hit and dying in 4 hits on average, and taking 2 damage per hit and dying in you know, like 18 hits on average. It's a huge difference. So yeah, their overall stat line: high strength, high attack skill, high defense skill, considering they don't have like a shield or anything, so that's just their chance to evade. High magic resist, 30 morale, so fuck off in terms of morale checks. Fire resistance, cold penalty, but alright, you know, fire resistance is very nice anyway, because of course fire is like the most common evocation type. Or one of the most, maybe not the most common, but it's very popular for its evocation qualities. A lot of people that have access to fire magic will do evocation or flaming arrows. These guys will be resistant to either one. And they have a heat aura. Heat aura is, of course, or any sort of elemental aura is very nice. And when you mass troops, it becomes extremely effective. So yeah, great stat block, high amount of hit points overall, and they have 2 attacks. They get their barbed tail as well as their trident. And this one, does it add? I think it does add, yeah, it's just -2 damage, but it adds strength, so it's still going to be at 12 damage for the barbed tail. And the trident, of course, deals massive damage at what is that, 21 damage. Okay, so they are a solid troop in general. And yeah, so you just spam the hell out of this spell. Summon a crapple, summon 30 of these, summon a whole demon horde, right? They are a fantastic troop. You get them at blood 3. Research 3 is relatively easy to get, so you can totally, even if you're not like Mictlan, where Mictlan has, of course, their national troops that are very good that you can summon with blood magic, but you know, you bind devils, bind frost fiends, which we're going to talk about in a sec. Either of these guys are very effective troops for the early game, particularly with how early you can get this. Binding like 20 devils or 30 devils is fantastic. And of course, when they really come into their own is when you like save up a huge army of them, like, you know, 80 or 100, and then you cast buffs on them, of course, because they've got that low base protection. So there's a lot of things you can do to buff them and make them more effective. Yeah, I mean, things like, I don't want to mention like just the huge, massive buffs, right? Bark Skin gives them 2 more protection, and they don't care about the fire resistance penalty because they have 25 fire resistance. What's another good one? I mean, obviously, if you can cast like Stone Skin on them, like or Iron Skin from like what's that called? Marble Warriors? It's Marble Warriors, yeah. That is extremely good on them. Stuff like, I think the Enlarge is pretty good. Casting Luck on them is pretty good. Not as good as it is on low-cost troops. Clustering some of them about a mage and casting like Body Ethereal on just a few of them, extremely effective if the enemy doesn't have magic weapons. So yeah, they're really good buff holders because they have great stats. They're elite troops, right? Okay, so oh wait, no, Frost Fiend. We're gonna look at Frost Fiends next. Frost Fiends are in the same like situation, but with a little bit of a different style to them, right? Their base protection at least is lower. Their hit points are lower. Their stat block is mostly not as good, except for defense skill here. 17 defense skill. So they get a lot of their tankiness from evasion, and in a situation where they can really make use of this defense skill, where they're not too heavily surrounded and they're not fighting super elite troops, they are really going to evade a lot of attacks, and it's going to make them much more survivable. Let's see, their Ice Rod. Anything special about this thing? I think it's just that it gives them a high defense, right? It's a magic weapon. I don't think the Devil's Trident is a magic weapon, actually. Yeah, it's piercing damage, not a magic weapon. Whereas the Ice Rod is a magic weapon, and they have this Frost Blast instead of that tail attack. Frost Blast is nice because it's 10 cold armor piercing damage. You don't get your strength added, so it's a little bit lower, but armor piercing is extremely good. And it also has area of effect 1. Now, only 6 ammunition, but this is... Oh, actually, that's right. It's a long-range attack. That's right. But it's a very good long-range attack. 6 ammunition, of area of effect 1, 10 armor-piercing damage. This is like an AoE crossbow bolt, right? So, and then afterwards, you can have them like... Gosh, I wonder if you want to tell them to hold an attack rear or fire. I guess it depends on the battle you're in. But after they run out of ammunition, of course, they are quite capable, like, frontline troops as well. They also have ice protection. So with these guys, they lose a lot of value if you did not take cold scale. So keep that in mind if you intend to be using these guys as part of your early to mid-game strategy, because ice protection is actually super important to them. If they're in cold 3, their protection goes to 5 to 8, which is on par with the Devils, and means that their 25 hit points combined with their 17 defense is going to be a lot more effective than it is if they are not in cold province. And of course, like with all the protection and power things, you get a penalty. Remember, if you get a protection penalty, I know cold power will give you a penalty in heat, just like the chaos power will give you a penalty in order. But yeah, you really do not want to fight these guys outside of neutral to cold provinces. Even without penalties, like these bonuses are kind of essential to these guys doing well. And cold power in particular. So cold power, if you're in cold 3, the defense skill goes up to 20. Okay, that's huge. That is an enormous amount of defense skill, and your attack skill goes up to 15, and your strength goes up to 15, right? So they're just brutally effective. You also get more precision, right? Like they needed it. 13 is already really good. So these guys just become brutally effective in cold 3. So if you have cold 3 scales, these guys are great, especially if you're fighting a defensive war. If you have heat scales, do not summon these guys, or rather, you probably should take cold scales so you can summon them in particular. Okay, Infernal Circle. So Infernal Circle is a neat spell in that it summons, let's see. Oh shit, this is not one I thought it was. Sorry, increases range of rituals. Kinda whatever. I don't like a lot of the like send type rituals that you target other provinces with in blood magic. So not particularly useful. In general, a lot of spells that target other provinces, it'll be kind of a niche instance anyway when you actually need to boost their range. So that covers that. Okay, so that takes us through all of the rank 0 to 3 magic schools for magic spells for blood magic, and I'll go from 4 to 6 in the next video. Yakri out.